Now, if we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. So I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty for all. Thanks.
It's kind of like trying to sing a song with somebody on Zoom, isn't it?
Terrible. Do we have any revisions to the agenda? I think we have
the only revision would be to add an action item for superintendent contract at the start of section 9.
Okay, and so we'll make that change and otherwise proceed based on the agenda. We also have minutes presented from the August 11 regular board meeting. Do we have any revisions to the October 11 minutes? Excuse me, the August 11 minutes. So those will be entered as presented. And that brings us to our spotlight. David?
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Huddleston, and she is going to take over and give us a spotlight.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Tonight I will highlight some of our Wellness Wednesday activities. So I'll begin with a brief overview of Wellness Wednesday, and then I'll provide you with an update on C Learning, C Equity, and some of the local school and community offerings. So I want to start off by revisiting our equity definition. We define educational equity as all students having the resources, opportunities, and rigorous and relevant learning to ensure their educational success. As you're aware, our district is focused on supporting the development of the whole child. We believe that social emotional well-being is an important component of achieving educational success. Wellness Wednesday is a dedicated time each week to focus on the well-being of our community, staff, students, and parents. The National Institute of Wellness outlines 6 dimensions of wellness, including social, emotional, physical, spiritual, occupational or school, and intellectual wellness. Our Wellness Wednesday activities are focused on social, emotional, and physical aspects of wellness. So Wellness Wednesday is an expansion of our district's work related to social emotional development. We currently have weekly district offerings and school-based offerings. As described in the recent Wellness Wednesday Town Hall, C Learning is a social emotional learning curriculum developed by Emory University that aligns with many of our CSD initiatives and programs, including PBIS, restorative practices, EL, and IB. It also integrates resiliency-based, trauma-informed practices that help children overcome adversity and build emotional and behavioral regulation skills, which are important as our students cope with the effects of COVID-19. First, I wanted to let you know that our team of facilitators want to thank parents for encouraging and supporting their students to engage in C Learning. We've completed 3 sessions so far, and we're beginning to receive feedback about those sessions and the program. Overall, students are beginning to make connections with peers. They're learning new coping strategies and sharing their experiences and insights about coping with stress and navigating learning in the virtual environment. So now I'll share just some feedback from some of our facilitators. One of our school counselors, Reagan Hudson, shared, in general, I feel like our C Learning classes on Wellness Wednesday allow students the opportunity and brave space to be really honest with one another. They often share deep emotions and thoughts related to the material we're covering, the pandemic, and their desire to connect on a deeper level. Several parents have also noted that they appreciate the opportunity that Wellness Wednesday provides to reset in the middle of the week. Another facilitator shared with us, let's see, Dr. Hart, that she's been really impressed with her middle school students and really remarked how easy it is for them to talk about kindness and their favorite food from a local restaurant, but also really having some of those deeper conversations about how they're navigating stay-at-home orders and COVID-19. It's really been an experience of community building in a time when kids have been isolated and having such a disruption to the norm. And Alan Pendrick, another one of our school counselors, shared a little bit about meeting with a student and that student's mother to discuss stress related to the current circumstances. And the student shared how she really enjoyed learning about the Peace Corner, which is one of the strategies taught in C Learning that really helps to be able to cope with what's going on. And so students right now have been working on a variety of help now strategies to be able to adjust to the current situation that we're in. Sabrina Shields shared, that's a tongue twister, shared a little bit about how Wellness Wednesday is really giving kids a mental break during the week, right there on Wednesdays, and that they hope that we are able to continue after this. So now transition to putting a spotlight on C Equity and giving you a little update about that. So C Equity is one of the Wellness Wednesday components for students in grades 6 through 12. And it will begin next Wednesday, and it will be asynchronous during virtual learning. Students will have an opportunity to watch the film Race, the Power of an Illusion, a 3-hour series that explores the concept of race from a scientific, historical, and sociological perspective. This series will serve as a tool to better prepare students for facilitated synchronous discussions related to race, privilege, policy, and justice. Students will receive a learning guide to accompany the film, and Courageous Conversation About Race affiliates will offer virtual office hours to answer any questions they may have about the film series. When we resume in-person learning, students will participate in the original 6-week curriculum discussed during the Wellness Wednesday Town Hall as a part of their advisement period. In addition to district offerings, some schools have offered enrichment opportunities for students, such as clubs, synchronous music, art and PE classes, and many other events. I'm sure you'll learn more about these as we hear from our schools in upcoming highlights and spotlights. I also wanted to share that there are a number of community partnerships that are in the works for Wellness Wednesday, including a film viewing and panel discussion related to bullying prevention that will be hosted by the Decatur Parents Network September 20th, with access to asynchronous viewing the following Wellness Wednesday. So in terms of next steps, we're currently examining options for continuing Wellness Wednesday for each phase of in-person learning. You'll be able to get more information about these next steps in our district dispatch, school e-blast, and also our Wellness Wednesday webpage on the CSD website. And now I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Huddleston, for that presentation. Just had a quick question. Since we've been virtual, I know that it's been harder to, well, I'm going to say harder, it's been different. You've had to do things differently since we're not in school. So I just had a question about how parents have been able to contact or get in contact with you or Dr. Banks in reference to anything they may be experiencing in the equity side of things. I mean, are you seeing an increase in concerns from parents, a decrease, or would you say it's about the same? Just curious to see if you feel like there's been any changes or parents are feeling like their kids are experiencing some of the same issues that we were experiencing when they were in school.
Sure. So we are still getting parents reaching out to us through our Google form that we have available to all students and parents. There have also been other ways that have been added, like at the high school, there's a connection through I think it's, what is it called, the voice box or something like that. I might have the name wrong, but students have been able to get information to be able to directly contact school staff about any concerns they're having. In terms of whether there are more, I think it's really about the same. some of the concerns are different. We're finding that people are reaching out, trying to find out about resources. They want to be connected with other resources in the community. And so we've been able to do that and work with some of our community partners to assist with that. We've been doing a great job in terms of getting technology to students who need it. So we're not getting very many students or parents reaching out to our office regarding that, because our team has really done a good job with proactively seeing who's checking in, and we have a lot of tools that let us know whether people reach out to us or not. We can monitor who's accessing virtual learning, and if there are kids that are not connecting, we're able to immediately reach out to them and make sure that they have what they need, whether it's a physical thing that they need or just sort of walking them through being able to navigate this new world.
Okay, and then could you just speak again to what you said earlier about the Google form? How can a parent contact if there is a complaint or something that they would like addressed? How can they get that to you?
Sure. So there's a link on the Equity and Student Support page on our school website, and they can use that form, whether it's a complaint, they have an idea, or any kind of concern. So anybody in the community can do that. And Dr. Banks and I are monitoring that, and we'll get back with them in 24 hours to follow up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Along those lines, to what extent are we directly reaching out? I mean, it's very good that we have a means for people to let us know that they're having a problem, but a lot of people are going to experience problems and not reach out. So we're not going to know about them unless we take the initiative to ask. And I think part of the answer might be the mini survey that just went out today, but I'll just pose the question: what are the efforts that we're doing on a sort of affirmative basis to reach out and find out how people are doing and to solicit information about how the kids are doing?
Sure. So one of the reasons we were very intentional about putting C Learning in place is to have a way that every week one of our mental health professionals and other facilitators would be able to connect with the students. So some of the students who are having concerns, who are experiencing stress related to COVID-19 and being in the virtual world and all of those things that we're facing right now, there's a weekly check-in with people who are able to talk about some of these issues. So we've had some referrals from that process of noting that students are bringing these concerns to the forefront. So that was one of the strategies that we put in place. Also, we have our social workers who are very intentional about following up with attendance and those who are not there. So I think having that weekly check-in with all students gives us that opportunity to just sort of be able to see kids and see how they're coming along, and then do follow-up as needed from there.
That's great. And I'm very happy that's happening too. Is there any check-in with parents as well? Or like if a kid sort of doesn't want to talk, is there an opportunity to, is a parent going to get a contact and the parent can say, well, actually, we've got some issues?
Absolutely, absolutely. If there are concerns about a student and we're not able to speak with that student, or they're not engaging in the conversation, there's definitely parent follow-up. And I'll share with you, our behavior specialist, Dr. Poe, last Saturday called every single child on her advisement list, called their parents, just to proactively reach out and say, hey, I want you to know who I am, and if you have any concerns, let me know. And so she would have that sort of face with the name and connection, and building that relationship so that if something comes up, the parents would know who to reach out to. So we have a lot of people who are proactively reaching out and connecting with the students and their parents. And the first few weeks of virtual learning, well, the first week for sure, that time was about reaching out to all of the parents and students so that parents would then know who to reach out to later on. So really trying to build that relationship. And I think given that we've started virtually, we want to put more energy there in building the relationship, because it's not as natural as it would be if everyone was coming to meet and greet in person and those kinds of things.
That's great. Thank you for that.
Sure.
I'm not a question, but I'm not going to ask it unless James, if y'all have questions, others. I'm interested in the virtual office hours that the Courageous Conversation folks will do. Is that on the student initiative? I think this is wonderful. I'm wondering if it's going to be a group discussion, or is it really just, can you explain the format? How does that work? I'll leave it at that.
So this is a part of CSD Equity. And so on the days that students will be watching the series, Race the Power of an Illusion, we'll have a couple of times that Wednesday that students can call in with questions about the film. So that's what the office hours are about. So members of our affiliate group will be there, and it'll be informal, really driven by the questions that students have related to the film.
And would you anticipate then that you'd have kind of like a Zoom call where you'd have 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 kids, but they're all kind of together and it's a group conversation?
Yes. We'll have a couple of different Google Meets that we set up. So, they can host up to 250 students. And Dr. Banks and I have had almost 250 students in the past with some of these conversations. So we just want to be available for any questions that come up. They'll have a study guide, but I think it's important to be able to, in the moment, if there are things that are coming up, that they can reach out to one of us to discuss it.
That's terrific.
Thanks for your work on this. I think it's important that the kids do have a chance to reset on Wednesdays. I know that in the beginning was a lot of confusion because it was new. Can you reiterate just how parents are going to find out about what time their students need to attend, what attendance is required? Do the students need to check in? Do they need to mark attendance? And then you said this new part, the CSD Equity, is asynchronous. So does that mean that they can do it anytime during the day and they are not physically checking in during that part? Can you just kind of walk us through the logistics of Wellness Wednesday from a parental and student point of view? Like, where do they need to be and when, and how do they find out about that?
Sure. So the schedules for Wellness Wednesday and how to access Wellness Wednesday are on our website. And so they're a little bit different based on what grade level the student is in. So K through 5 students have a set time that they have already been assigned. It's going to be at that time, for as long as we're in the virtual setting. So I don't have all of the exact times for each grade level, but they are on our website and they're listed there. For grades 6 through 12, students access this through their advisement. There's information in their advisement classroom, Google Classroom, and most of the groups have their own Google Classroom, so they'll be able to click on a link there and go to their CSD Learning class through advisement. In terms of attendance, 6 through 12th grade students are able to go in and click that they're present through Infinite Campus. And for the younger grades, the facilitators are noting the students who are present during that time. And students do have an opportunity, if for whatever reason they are not able to participate in the live class, they can then watch the recording. So there's a recording that's posted in either the homeroom or the advisement class, and they can go back and watch that. And then they will be credited with attending, just as if they were able to participate in the live session. So I may have missed one of your questions. Let me know if I did, but hopefully I touched on most of it.
Yeah, so just to confirm, so for the K through 5, their CSD Learning advisement period is fixed and it's not changing. And then for the 6 through 12, they're still required to attend the advisement period, which is going to remain the same time as what it was. They should take attendance on Wednesdays to say that they were there, but they could watch the CSD Learning section at a different time if they need to.
They could
Okay.
That's right. They can watch the C Learning at another time if they need to.
Okay.
The C Equity will begin asynchronously, which they can watch it anytime that Wednesday, or for whatever reason they need to watch it the next day, they can
Okay.
still do that on their own schedule. And they are checking their attendance in Infinite Campus.
Okay.
So for the younger students,
yeah.
facilitators will definitely be checking back if they notice that someone is not present, to then make sure that they are accessing the recording.
Okay, that's helpful. I got a lot of questions from people in the neighborhood about that. And so that's
Sure.
helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Dr.
All right.
Huddleston.
Well,
You're welcome.
yes, thank you. That was awesome.
Let's see, our next,
All right, the public comment is next. We have 4 people signed up.
so before we do public comment, we'll just try to give the standard reminder that this is an opportunity to speak to the board about issues of general importance to the school community. It's not a time to raise complaints or issues that have to do with individual students or faculty or staff. Those types of issues should be addressed through other channels, but not in this public meeting. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. If there's any issue about whether whether comments are going, over the line, I'm going to ask you to pause. And if I do ask you to pause, please bear with me. We'll sort it out. And if we need to, provide a caution, we'll do it. And otherwise, we'll ask you to continue. But if I ask you to stop, please do, and give us a moment to speak. And I think with that, if we can call up. Also, before you speak, if you please give us your name, tell us tell us your connection to the school system. So if you're a parent, just a community member, a business owner, whatever it is, just so that we know who's talking with us. Thanks.
All right, so we have 4 speakers. The first 2 I cannot find in the list. So Marnie Grodzin and Mary Helen O'Connor, if you're here, if you could rename yourself in Zoom with your actual name, then I will be able to track you down so that I can approve you for the meeting, so you can speak. So we're going to jump to the 3rd one, and we'll circle back around, and that is Sakari Morvi. So Sakari, I'm going to click allow to talk here. And you are live now, so feel free to unmute and start when you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for allowing me to comment tonight. I'm a parent, I should say, of a 3rd grade student. So that's my connection to the district. I just have less of a comment, but more of a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. One, I know that you all have the September 18th deadline looming in terms of your decision with reopening. And I'm just wondering if you all will have the opportunity in this short time frame to take into consideration any spikes due to the Labor Day holiday. So it's just one question that I had. The other question I had is about temperature checks. I understand from the superintendent's town hall last week that the schools will not be doing temperature checks. The onus for that will be on parents. And so I'm just wondering if there has been any thinking around what happens for maybe families that don't have thermometers, the ability to do those checks, or around parents or families who just simply forget, who arrive at the school, rushed out the door to get there, and remember, oh no, we forgot to do that. Like, what sort of provisions will be in place? Because I imagine, particularly as students first re-enter school after having been away for many months now, catching, any instances of illness early will be, advantageous for our whole community. So I'm just wondering about the provisions for those who may forget or who don't have the proper tools to do those home checks. And then my final question has to do with those who opt to continue in the virtual learning, maybe want to see the semester out in that format. I understand also from the superintendent's town hall that those students may be reassigned to a different teacher given just bandwidth capacity limits with teachers teaching in person and online. And I'm wondering if there will be any sort of communication to parents about what that might look like when students do return, if they would maintain the teacher that they were initially assigned, assigned? Would they stay with the teacher that was their home, the teacher during virtual learning? Just, I feel like this information would be helpful as parents make decisions, for the short and long term. So thank you so much for this opportunity and for taking these questions into consideration.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And just in case you're new to the meetings, we don't answer the questions right here, but those are things I'll be touching on a little later in the meeting. So if you're able to stick around, that would be great. And I will touch on those things. Our next speaker is Matthew Carlton. All right, I think, let's see here, Matt. Okay, I had to make you a panelist, but it looks like you should be able to talk now. Can you give that a shot? Are you there, Matt? I can see your lips moving. We still can't hear you, Matt, unless I'm the only one. I can't hear you.
No, I can't hear him either. I can see him. I can see he's talking, but I can't hear him.
All right, Matt, I'm not sure what's happening. I'm sorry that's not working out. Maybe we can try to connect with you a little later and see if that can work. Okay, let me check Marnie, see if she was able to join. I do not see her. And Mary Helen O'Connor. I do not see her either. So unfortunately, the other speakers we are not going to be able to hear from tonight because they are not in the meeting or connected in a way we can't find them. So
David?
that concludes our public comment, I think.
Is there a number, like, could they call on a telephone, Eston, and get some guidance about how to, and maybe we could circle back and, before, at some point later in the meeting, I don't know, after one of these items, and give them a chance to speak, but maybe they could call in or something.
Yeah. Why don't, if go ahead, Eston.
I'll drop Mr. O'Connor a line and see if I can help him.
Awesome. He's got their contact info, so he'll reach out to him and just let us know, Eston, if we're able to come back to it later.
All right, thank you. Awesome. All right, so that for now concludes public comment, and hopefully we can hear from a few more folks. But we'll move on to the superintendent's comment for now.
So I'm just going to keep it super brief because I get to talk a little bit in a little bit also. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our staff and our students and our parents. We've had a rough start, right? Like everybody has, but I have to say the folks I've talked to have very much appreciated all the hard work happening in the district, throughout the district. And especially in comparing to what they're hearing from friends in other districts and things, both amongst our colleagues and amongst our families. I just can't thank our staff enough. Our teachers have really stepped up, and so many other people behind the scenes that you don't even know what they're doing, but they're doing amazing things to keep everything functioning and working. We've got our major things I think Lewis might touch on, so I won't steal your thunder, Lewis, but just I'm really proud of everybody and all the great work they're doing. We still have challenges like anybody. Many of us are experiencing it as parents and the challenges with our own kids and those frustrations, but I just can't thank all of our staff enough. They're doing a really tremendous job, and so many parents have stepped up and And I think they have a new appreciation for teachers. If they didn't before, they understand just how hard it is to manage all these things and all the amazing stuff our teachers do. So I just want to, I'll leave my comments at that for now, and I'll share some other stuff later when we get to that item. So.
Well, that brings it to the chair's report, and I feel a little bit of pressure to hit on all those things that you didn't. I'm not sure that I'll be able to, but I did. I was thinking about it today, about how proud I am to be a part of this school system, and what a tremendous job you all are doing. And I you know, an unprecedented challenge that I think that we're doing our best to meet. I'm really proud of the response, and thinking of what to say. I want to make clear that, you know, this is not a great outcome. I mean, it's terrible and it's not acceptable, and the virtual learning is just not what it needs to be. And so we don't want anyone to think that we're going to coast in this situation. But that's not a reflection on the terrific work that you and your staff have done and our teachers have done to make the very best out of a very bad situation. So thanks to all that you and our teachers and your staff have done to see us through this. We also have a couple specific shout outs, and one of them, we got a good report on the nutrition program, and this is one of the things that, you know, it just makes you feel good to know how hard people are working to make sure that people have these great meals. So thank you for the tremendous job that our folks are doing to keep our kids fed and our community fed. And I'll have to confess, I haven't yet. I keep meaning to order some meals for the family. And I would encourage anybody out there listening to do that, because it'll help the program, because it's a program that needs funds, but it'll also help the families because it's a good way to have a good, nutritious lunch. And I think a breakfast too, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Breakfast, lunch, and milk.
So we're taking orders, and I would encourage you to.
I'll jump in real quick, Louis, to just say, as a father of 3 kids, it is so awesome to just pull 3 lunches out and set them on the counter and say, "Here you go, kids, eat." So.
Yeah. So take advantage of that, everybody. The other is to highlight the creativity of our school media specialists, district curriculum and instruction team, and the transportation department for creating and implementing a process to allow students to check out books from the school libraries during virtual learning. And this is another, you know, there's so many ways that you and your staff have thought through the challenges and thought, how can we make this work for the kids? And this is just another example. Along with providing hot spots, you know, we're getting books from the library to the people who need them. So, you know, that's another thing that we need to celebrate. There's a personal achievement here. DHS senior Virginia Weston interned over the summer with NASA in the STEM Enhancement in Earth Sciences program. This is a program funded by NASA and managed by the Texas Space Grant Consortium with the University of Texas. 500 students apply and about 50 are accepted. So this is a tremendous opportunity for Virginia and a great honor. And again, I think it reflects well on DHS. So congratulations to all. And the final one is really fun, which is the DHS Black Student Union's work and to place a historical marker for Martin Luther King indicator. I went to look at it today because I saw the emails and the excitement about it and learned that it's not been placed yet. But this is a terrific initiative where the Black Student Union has spearheaded the effort to get a historical marker placed, I think right near the campus. Where is it going to be, David?
I think it's going to be downtown, if I remember correctly, but I'm not positive.
But it's a terrific little piece of history that I didn't know about until I started reading about this marker that commemorates, you know, the time in 1960 when Dr. King was arrested as part of a sit-in, I think, and was sentenced to like hard labor. And the president, or I think not, or the presidential candidate Kennedy intervened to help that not happen. And actually may have turned the election. I'm not doing justice to the history, but it's a really great story. And I think that this is a particularly exciting initiative because it's not only telling history that needs to be told, but it's also an example of our students sort of learning how to make things happen in the world and actually to take the initiative to get this done. And third, it's just that it's the kind of thing that's going to get people excited about history itself because it's so interesting and local and important. So that's a great achievement, and congratulations to all who made it happen or making it happen. The particular event is that the request to place the historical marker has now been approved by the Georgia Historical Society. So this will happen, it just hasn't yet.
And just while you're on the topic, if people want to donate to help make this happen, they can go to DecaturEducationFoundation.org/MLK marker, and they can donate to help support the kids in this effort.
And that's all I have for the board comment.
Any other comments before we move on? All right, I think we're ready for the chair's report, or I mean the consent items, sorry.
Right, so we have, let's see, 5 consent items. The number 1 is the career and technical education fiscal year 2021 state and federal grants. Number 2 is the air ionization system for DHS. Number 3 is the personnel report. Number 4, the school nutrition report. And number 5, the financial reports. Do we have a motion to approve the consent items?
Motion to approve the consent items.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So the consent items are unanimously approved. I thought I'd ask, not as a question about whether to approve it, but David, can you, I would like you to mention what's the air ionization system, because I think people would be interested in that.
Yeah. And so the air ionization system is a system that goes into our HVAC. DHS is the last one to get it because they're the biggest school and the most expensive. We've installed it in every other school, and it's underway at DHS, but basically it kills viruses and bacteria and other things in the HVAC system. So in addition to being a really positive improvement with coronavirus, it's just a positive improvement overall to help keep our air healthier in general for all kinds of different illnesses. So it's a very exciting technology to get put in, and every building has it now, and DHS will be completed very soon.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda, we're down to 9, which is I guess it's action, information, and discussion. But do we have the public comment ready yet?
Aston, do you have any update on public comment? Did you hear?
Yeah, I spoke with him. He's in the attendees list. If you want to take another at bat.
All right. Okay, Matt, I just enabled it. Are you able to unmute and speak? We're not hearing anything, just so you know, if you're trying to speak.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello,
we
can you hear
you.
me?
Yes.
Okay. I can't hear myself, but I'm just going to talk because I can hear myself through my voice. Hi. Thank you for letting me talk. My name is Matt Carlton. I've got a senior in the high school and a sophomore in the high school. My daughter, Maggie Carlton, she graduated last year, so she's a freshman at UGA. That's my dog howling in the background. I just want to briefly talk about extracurricular activities. I think it's an important issue. I haven't done a ton of research on every single sport. I have looked at distance running, cross-country running, I guess because my kids both run cross-country. And even state of New York is allowing cross-country. And there's been tons of cross-country meets around the state. I haven't really heard any problems concerning coronavirus with running. I don't really think there is. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a scientist, but I'm certainly advocating for cross-country. I ran cross-country through college myself, and running cross-country is how I came down to Emory University, and it's important to me. And, you know, Decatur boys are the defending state champs. So I really hope they get a chance to at least run in the regionals, which I think is in October. And then the state finals is either the first week of November or the last week of October. I think it'd be fantastic. We could try to defend our title. And the girls are, you know, are out there running too. They're one of the top teams in the region. And it's a bunch of great kids. I mean, the coach, Mary Souther's fantastic. Everybody's fantastic. They have worked all summer with like distance practicing. Mary Souther would send out an email like, here's what you do this week. And all the kids are doing it. It's safe. They're not like hanging out in a bus together. And so I just wanted my perspective to be heard. So I appreciate you allowing me to speak. That's about all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Matt. And do stay tuned because I will touch on something that's relevant to your comments when I get to my item in a little bit. So, and the other two are not present yet, Louis. So that's the last one that we have at this time.
Okay. Okay. So that'll take us to, well, this is the, I think we amended the agenda to discuss the contract first. And so our first item on the agenda, which I will explain rather than asking Dr. Duty to do it, is that the board, well, we need to vote to give Dr. Duty to renew his contract. And so this will be, I guess, your third contract.
Yes, that's correct.
I have to check because it doesn't seem like it's been that long. Because each
gone
contract
fast.
is 3 years, but we're on the tail end of year number 3. And so we have already discussed in executive session the terms of the contract, and we need now to vote to approve it. In general terms, what the board has, is what's on the table, is essentially to take your current contract, which includes a base salary and a bonus, to convert the bonus into the base salary so that will be, and historically that the board has always voted to approve the bonus in the past. And so the board is, that what's being discussed now is to take your base salary, add the bonus, turn that into base salary, and also give a modest increase to bring your salary now in line with that of other superintendents with common experience that you have. And I think that's what to say. I guess the one other thing is that the evaluation, the board is unanimously very much in Dr. Duty's camp. We think that you are doing a great job. And it's the board's strong intention and desire to keep you around, to pay you competitively, and to make it clear that you're valued. And so what's on the table now is that we're looking for a motion to approve the contract along the terms discussed in executive session.
Motion to recommend approval of the superintendent contract as discussed in executive session.
Second.
All right, all in favor, or is there any further discussion?
Nope.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
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 Well, thank you all. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be sticking around.
Thank
Thank
you for all
you.
you do, Dr.
Thank
Duty.
you.
All right, that brings us now to the next item for, I think this is for discussion, is the board policy monitoring report.
Correct. So you may recall that back before coronavirus, we had developed a new system for board policy monitoring reports, and we were going along pretty decent. And then the virus hit, and we kind of fell off the wagon. And so this is our first foray back into that process. So September is staff support month for the board policy monitoring calendar. And so Adina and Maggie are going to present us with that. Now I'll turn it over to Maggie. I think she's there. Let's wait and see. Adina and Maggie, can you unmute? And there's Maggie. And there's Adina. Okay, Maggie, you want to take it away?
Sure. Now I hopefully had a chance to read the annual report that we put together, so we're not going to do a formal presentation. I just wanted to highlight a couple things from that. report. And as I noted in the introduction of the report, is that it was a pretty turbulent year. Coronavirus really threw a wrench in a lot of things, as well as the resignation of our previous executive director. And searching for a replacement in the midst of COVID made that a little more difficult. And then all the legal requirements and loopholes that came at us through the coronavirus Family First Coronavirus Act, so that it really kind of laid a lot of extra loops and hula hoops for us to jump through. But we did accomplish a lot this year in the staff support department. I think the staff recruiting efforts have really improved, and highlighted that in our report, as well as our just the process of getting everyone onboarded through the virtual environment, I think was huge. That was a lot of extra work on that team. Adina and Marcia is also here. Did you guys have anything you wanted to highlight?
Thank you this evening. I really just wanted to just take a time to highlight my team. Like Maggie said, this has been a very turbulent year, but we have managed to overcome many of the challenges that we were faced with doing everything virtually. Most of the time, we pride ourselves in that one-to-one contact with all of our employees, but we tried to do our best with every virtual meeting that we had with every new hire, and just making them feel welcome to our district in any way that we could. And just highlighting, just making sure that we go forward and be more intentional in anything going forward in this year, and just to be better.
Marcia, do you want to add anything, or did she cover it?
Well, one of the things I'd like to just mention is I'd like to just say how much I appreciate working with the teachers who accepted student teachers this year. I think during this challenge with online instruction, I think it was, you know, to their part, a lot of commitment to the future educators to be able to, you know, take another adult into the classroom with all they were trying to put together and just make it possible. So I really appreciate those teachers who were able to do that this year.
I just want to point out, because they don't make a big deal about it, but when you think about it, onboarding new staff into a virtual environment is not something that we've ever been trained how to do, right? They built this from the ground up. How do you bring somebody into a new job in a 100% virtual way? And then, as Marcia was mentioning, we also still are supporting student teachers. That's part of our ethical responsibility as educators, is to help that future generation of teachers. And so, as if it's not hard enough to be a student teacher, you have to start student teaching in a virtual environment. But Marcia has helped make sure that was successful as well. So this is an example of when I was sharing earlier how there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that folks would never even know was happening. And frankly, a testament to the fact that they're doing such a good job is that you don't hear about it, because they're just making it work and they're figuring it out. So kudos to all of them. Are there any questions on anything from the report that we can hit on for anybody?
Heather, you're on mute.
Looks like you're talking, but you're
Sorry,
muted.
yeah, you're right. I just wanted to first say, you know, I think it was a very good report. I think there were some things that were done very well this year, and it turned out to be the right year to do them exceptionally well. One being the recruitment that started early, and that CSD had a job fair early, and was really just ahead of the curve to begin with. And it turned out to be so critical that we were, because the job fair, I think, was in February, and then the coronavirus epidemic began in March. And just, I'm grateful to you for having done that. I hope we continue to do it for all the reasons why it's great to be out early to get the best talent, but just, I'm very grateful, especially this year, that happened. So thank you for doing that, and for continuing to do that, because I think it is important that we're out there early like I said, to get the best teachers and staff on board. I also wanted to recognize all the adjustments that it's evident that you had to do to bring people on board, like doing the virtual interviews, the virtual background checks, the hiring and orientation virtually, and just how you had to reinvent what that looked like, because that didn't look anything like what you've done in previous years. And I'm sure it was extra challenging, not only to do the work, but have to reinvent how it was done. So thank you for all of your hard work and creative approaches to those things and bringing great people on board, because that's why we are the great school system that we are, just thanks to our teachers and staff. So your job is so important. And then I looked at the report and I was very interested in seeing the beautiful graphs that you have, particularly in looking at separation. And I thought it was very interesting to see the racial breakdown of separations. And I noted the same thing that was pointed out in the report, that, you know, there was a higher separation of Black employees. So I was really wanting to know more about that and thought maybe we could add a little more detail to the report if it's available. For example, I think it would be really interesting to see a racial breakdown of each job category. I see that we have job category for separations broken down by job category, but I think it's important that we, in the different jobs, also have diverse employment, you know, within each job category. So not just, you know, in teachers and having our, you know, teachers numbers reflect our student body, but also in all of the other areas as well, really to look at that and see if we need to maybe try harder or have more diversity in some of those other groups as well. And I thought that it would also be very interesting to see a racial breakdown of the separations by job category. So not just knowing that more of the people who left were Black, but that, like, where, in which job category was that happening, or was it happening across all the job categories? So now that we see that that's happening, I'd like to understand more about why that's happening. And then as we drill down, maybe we can then work to improve that and make that more equitable. So those were my comments.
I think that aligns with our aspirations perfectly, Heather. That's exactly the kind of thing that we want to get to. So I appreciate you sharing that. The other thing I think we will be adding in the future is, what do the applicants look like? So for the entire life cycle of a position, from applicants to who's selected to who ends up leaving, like, what does it look like? And like we've all learned in our training, isolate race, right? Which is what you're getting at, is look at the role of race in all of those different aspects, and are we comfortable with how it looks or not? And if not, what are we going to do about it? So I think it's a great point. Any other thoughts or questions?
I'm going to jump in unless Tasha or James want to. So I had the same, many of the same comments. And number one, I appreciate the report, not just the report, which is a reflection of good work that you all have done on staff support, but also the report itself, which I think is a good report, and I like the structure of it. I had a few comments that have little to do with this actual report, and a little bit more to do broadly with this business of doing monitoring reports, which is something we're still trying to feel our way through. And so I thought I'd make a comment or two and then come back to the specific issue that about the diversity and separations. And the first is that for each monitoring report, I would think that it would be good to start with the policy that we're monitoring. And so just at the beginning, the head, you know, this is the policy, whatever the language is about staff support. So I don't think this particular policy has a lot of meat on it. So I don't think it would really change the report, but nonetheless, that's what we're supposed to be monitoring against. And so if we could lead with it, that would help. The other is that I particularly like this because it's the kind of information that I want to hear. I also think that generally, and this goes to some of the discussion that we had earlier today, I think it's important to mix the sort of impressionistic evaluation of how we're doing with some actual quantitative SMART goals. And so I would suggest that we, in addition to providing this sort of, resume of here's how we've done, and in addition to add, and here are our specific SMART goals for next year. And you've listed them. It's not that you're not thinking about it. You said this is where we're working towards. But I think the discipline of actually having a number that we're trying to achieve doesn't mean that we're going to hold you to it, but it does mean, I think it's a discipline that will ensure that we've got something that we're working towards and that we're going to hold you accountable, not harshly, right? We'll understand if you don't get there, but it means that we're all working toward an objective that we can evaluate against. And so I would suggest that for the next iteration, we try to add that component as well. I know that that's a challenge and we can deal with it, but that was
That's a great point. Yep. Okay.
My next question goes to the point about the racial breakdown of separations. And well, actually, before you get to the racial breakdown, I would be interested to know if our retention rate, I think that was across all categories. It might have only been teachers. I can't remember, but was 91%. I'd be interested to know trends. And so is that consistent with what we've experienced? I wouldn't be surprised to see a difference, given COVID, but I would just like to know the information. So for the past, 5 years or whatever, what's it been?
It's interesting you bring that up. That's also one of our aspirations, is to have those trends. Exactly. We were just talking about it earlier today. So we're on the same page.
Okay. And also comparisons. And so how do we stand against other districts? So is 91%, kind of in the ballpark, or, are we out, in any way out of the ordinary, because that would be a cause for concern. And so if that data is available for other districts, it'd be nice to see it. And likewise with the racial component, I had the same question. I mean, we have a pie chart that shows the breakdown of who's leaving. We don't actually show the pie chart of what the racial makeup of the staff to begin with are. At a minimum, I would add that, so that it looks like about 70% of our staff are white, and yet 50% of the separations are Black. At least that's how I remember the report. I would just provide both pieces of information in the chart up against each other. Finally, well, actually, there's two other questions. When we're looking at separations, I've always been interested in a real in going after the exit interviews. And there's a word in the report about exit interviews, but right now I don't remember what it said. And so my question is, not just for the racial component, but I really think we need to know why people are leaving, and we need to solicit their input, so that in many, many, many cases, it's going to be for personal reasons that have nothing to do with the school. But in those cases where there is something that we need to know about, we're probably not going to find out unless we reach out and try to get the information. And so, and we've had this discussion for a couple of years. Are we doing that? What's being done in terms of exit interviews to really try to get that information?
Well, right now, with all of our separations, we do mail out the separation notice along with an exit interview. And to have to request a return back. We have very little response a lot of times. We try to gather that information for the small amount that we do receive back. Most of the time it is, just going to another district or something to do with personal reasons. Maybe you go into a district that's closer to their home, or just personal reasons. But that is something, definitely a goal that we're looking to embark on, maybe doing something electronic, maybe a Google form, or just something that will be more easily accessible to them instead of trying to mail something back to us.
That would be, that sounds great, because I know that if I have to take some kind of affirmative step to do it, I'm just lazy enough that it might not happen.
Right.
So that sounds good. Well, I appreciate that. I think it's important, so I'm glad that we're working on it. And the last is whether we have thought about incorporating, as we've talked about in various aspects of our plans, some actual survey measures. I know that we're working on surveys of staff and climate, and it'd be nice to incorporate into this annual report measures of and it needs to be appropriate so that we're eliciting answers to the questions that are that are really going to inform how we think that we're doing in terms of staff support. But that's something that we can do and that we're working on. So my question is if we could incorporate those kind of the target, and then maybe set some goals around what the levels of staff satisfaction should be.
We actually signed a contract for our tripod surveys, which is a culture and climate survey. And we are going to be doing that with staff. And so this will be the first year. And tripod's got a really good platform to look at the results so that you can track progress over time and work on SMART goals.
Terrific. That's great. Thank you all. That's all that I've got. It's a very good report.
Hey, Maggie, I had a quick question. Thank you all for the report. It was very well done. And I know at one point a few years ago, we were using kind of the marker of matching the amount of Black students we had to the amount of Black staff we had. And then I know in conversations that we had, especially after Courageous Conversations, one, the benefit in all students and non-Black students having an experience with teachers of color and also male teachers. So increasing that number so that we're not just basing it on the number of non-Black students we have in the school. And so I'm wondering what litmus test are we using now, since we're not necessarily matching it to the number of students? What is the goal if 70% or around 70% is where we are? What are we thinking the goal? Where would we like to have that number?
So at the time, what we spoke about was, and just to give some background for folks who may be listening and weren't part of the previous conversation, the concern was that if Decatur becomes less and less diverse, and we set the diversity of Decatur as the benchmark for our staff, we will have less and less diverse staff, and that's not what we want for all the reasons you just stated, Tasha. That the importance of a diverse staff goes far beyond what the students look like. It's about what our students how they should be taught, right? And who they should have teaching them. And so what we talked about looking at was like, what is either a Georgia metric for what's the racial breakdown in Georgia, or what's the racial breakdown in the Southeast? I don't think we actually landed on a specific number yet, but that's what we were looking at, was look a little bit more globally so that as Decatur changes, it's not making it look like we're achieving something that we're really not achieving, because the metric is lowering when we should be holding ourselves up higher. So I don't think that we settled on a specific metric at this time, but that's what it was going to be based on.
That makes sense. And we probably will have to go outside of Georgia for that, for a number to work
we might. We might.
If I could, do you mind if I step in just to, it's in line with this conversation, which is that I know that some folks have recommended, I think it was the Color of Law, was suggesting for similar purposes that you use the metropolitan statistical area. And that if you use, because it's local enough to be kind of our community, but it's broad enough so that you're not gonna get the effects of local segregation. And so if, the idea is that the staff should basically reflect our community, broad enough, but still kind of an Atlanta-centered base would probably be
That's a great idea. We can look into that. That's a great idea.
I'm sorry, Tasha. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that was it. That was my only question. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, Maggie, Adina, Marcia, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I think to all the board members, you'll see these just get better and better. Adina really stepped up. This was the first report she had to do for you like this, and she did a great job. So really appreciate it.
Nicely done.
Very well done.
The next item is a recommended change. Sorry, go ahead. Do you want me to go ahead, Louis?
That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. The next item is a recommended change to board policy. So just a little bit of background. With our financial conditions where they are, we've been talking a lot more about trying to make it as easy as possible if folks want to donate to our programs. And so there's lots of ideas floating around about how to support, food service, how to support football, how to support all these other things. And a lot of times what comes up is the ability to do donations as easily as possible. So as we were having these discussions, I looked at donation policies throughout Metro Atlanta, and ours were very different than any other school district. And so I put there a recommendation for a change to board policy 2.8C that removes that dollar amount threshold and instead puts in other protections in terms of what's the purpose of the donation? Is it something we actually need? Is it something that have we considered the long-term costs of it, et cetera? And so I would recommend making that change to board policy 2.8C.
So I guess we should start with the motion, and then if we have a second, we can have discussion. So is there a motion?
Move
Motion.
to recommend the changing the wording of the board policy 2.8C as proposed.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, discussion.
None from me.
I guess the only comment I'll make is that, I'm comfortable with this change. The concern that I had and that I wanted to be clear about before supporting it is that the board should have a role at some point in some cases about accepting donations, because we do need to make sure it's too tempting sometimes to accept donations that may or may not be consistent with our long-term plans, with our emphasis, and with our budget in terms of the future upkeep and support. And so I'm comfortable with the way this is written, that it basically allows the superintendent the discretion to accept most donations upon consideration of these factors. And then if it's a close call, basically to bring it to the board so that the board would then have a role. I wanted to make sure that in those close cases, the board would have a role, because I think that's appropriate.
Yep. Totally agree. And it fits right with how we handle a lot of things where at some point it may be difficult to define the specifics, but at some point the superintendent knows when it's time to bring something to the board. And this would be a perfect example of that. So we will rely on good judgment to make sure we have that call, because it may not just be dollar amount related.
So with that, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And so I think James said aye, so it's unanimous. Okay. All right. Next item is data and planning regarding the virus response. David.
Yeah. So I've got a couple things here. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Just a second. Oops, wrong button. Hold on. Some of these things get pretty small, so I'm going to try sharing just a portion of my screen, and hopefully, let's see if I can do this. Okay, so I think you can see what I see. Can you see the graph, or are you seeing your pictures as well?
David, I'm seeing like I don't see the whole graph. It's more like I'm seeing a piece of it, like it's zoomed in on the graph. It could be a problem.
And there will be some of that, yeah. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through a couple things to show you kind of where we are right now with a couple of our situations in terms of the data. So these are some of the most common things that I'm looking at in terms of some data points that I think it's important for people to keep informed of. So this is the DeKalb County report of positive cases over time. The last time I shared this at the town hall, I think last week, things were going very much straight down. And as you can see, now we're getting this little leveling out. One of the concerns that was shared earlier was about Labor Day spikes. That is also a concern of ours, is making sure we understand the impact of a 3-day weekend and what that does to our testing rates. So this is one example of things that we'll be looking at in order to figure out where we are with our, in terms of cases themselves. One of the other metrics we look at is what they call the reproduction rate. And so we want to see this stay under 1. And this is an example of one that if there is a big spike because of Labor Day parties and things, this is where we'd probably see this rise up above 1. So I've talked a lot about what these specific numbers are, so I'm not going to get into that now, but I'm happy to go back and answer any questions on any of those. But this is encouraging to see this staying below 1. Hospitalizations is another item that we look at. So these are hospitalizations over time, and these different lines represent different ages. And so this is very encouraging to see hospitalizations going down to such a low level per 100,000. So we'd want to see that maintained over time. Oops, hold on. I gotta wait for this window to go away so I can click. See if I can get up here without it coming down. Another number that we look at is the testing rate. And so Georgia, you can see right here in the middle, right now we're only at 46% of the desired testing target. And so we are not doing that well in terms of testing. And I share that because the results that you're looking at for other types of data are often predicated on a sufficient testing. And so if you're not testing enough, your data may look good because you're not testing enough. And so that's something that we have to keep in mind. And so we're also always looking at this. And Georgia for a long time has been fairly low here and needs to really ramp up the testing so we can have confidence. I knew this one would unload. Hold on a second, let me reload this. Some of you have seen this. This is put together by Georgia Tech, and you can look at this continuous risk assessment. And so on this one, for instance, if you look at 30, you go up the graph. If you don't know how to read these graphs, watch the town hall. There's a great recording in there about how to read them. But basically, let's say you think that the actual testing rate is about 10 times what we're actually seeing. So you'd go up from 30 to the gold line because that represents 10 times, and you'd go across. And this would say that there is about, say, a 65% chance that in a group of 30 people, there's at least one who is positive for coronavirus. So this is very helpful to get a feeling for the risk of getting together in events. And it also, because of they provide these different graphs, it helps you understand what does that impact of under testing have. So if we're at 5 times the rate or 10 times or 20 times what the testing reports, you can use that judgment related to this. The other thing I would say is, as I shared in the town hall, we are reaching out to some of our members from that team science that we talked about previously to talk through these and figure out, like, can we set some metrics here of this is what we want to see for a certain number of days? What kind of things can we look at here in order to set some and bring some certainty to our decision-making process? So we're still working on that right now. And then the final thing I want to talk about is you may have heard me talk about what I'm calling micro surveys. And so we're trying something new and we're doing random samples of our stakeholders and surveying their impressions of what they're feeling about returning to hybrid or full in-person learning. And so I sent out our first test one this weekend. I didn't think we'd get very many responses because it was a holiday weekend. We actually got quite a few responses. And so the idea of this is we are randomly selecting folks who are parents, staff members, teachers, and students who are grade 6 and above, and just asking them 2 fairly simple questions. One, we're asking them to rate on a Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree 3 statements. We should continue 100% virtual. We should move to hybrid. We should move to full in-person. And so they rate their feelings on that. And then they have one more question that says, if you had to decide today, which would you choose? 100% virtual, hybrid, or in-person? And so this is just a quick sample of the very first survey that we did from this weekend. So we've got 360, I think, responses or something around there. The pie chart shows the aggregated results. So for instance, 100% virtual, 37.6% strongly agreed that 100% virtual was the way to go. What you see in the bar charts is that same information, but broken down by what group those folks are representing. And so the advantage of this is just understanding what are our students feeling, what are our teachers feeling, what are our parents feeling, and are there differences between these different groups? And so you can see in general, as you look at this, you can see the support for agreeing with the virtual, the agreement on hybrid is a little bit higher, and then there's a considerable disagreement with going for in-person. And then finally, that other question that's asked, just that single choice, if you had to decide 100% virtual, hybrid, or 100% in-person, what would you choose? And so you can see 60% said 100% virtual, 31% hybrid. And then you can see how that breaks down differently between students, parents, teachers, and staff members. So the point of these surveys is to try to gather data over time. And so we're sending out the random samples. There's a limited window in which to respond. And then we select another random sample and send them out again several days later. And so part of it is wanting to look at the trends over time and see what happens as are their feelings changing consistently? Because if we have parents who refuse to send their kids to school even when we think it's safe to do so, or if we have teachers who do not feel safe coming back to school even when we think it's safe to do so, or things like that, we need to know where people stand. And so the idea of these surveys is to have that more anecdotal, feelings-based picture of where do people stand right now. So a big piece of this is education. We need to make sure we're educating people about what it is that we're trying to do. And some other things that have come up that I think people find helpful is actually knowing what we have done in our schools. So another part of that town hall is the actual photographs to see the dividers going in on tables, the markings on the signs that have gotten hung up, all of these different mechanisms that we're putting in place. The air ionization system was one of the things we talked about in the town hall and things like that. So we're going to continue educating people and letting them know where things are so that when they do get the survey, they can respond knowing the facts. And so we're doing our best to get that information out there so folks can respond to that. So those are some of the data that we're looking at in terms of as we get closer and closer to making a decision. One of the things that people are asking is like, what do we expect on September 18th? What's going to happen, right? So we've shared with folks that by September 18th, we're going to announce a decision for what's going to happen after September 25th. Just a reminder, September 25th is the end of that first 6-week period. And so there's still a lot to happen between now and then. But in general, what we're hoping to be able to do is share like what our long-term plans are moving forward after September 25th. I will tell you, in looking at both the data for the spread of the virus and the data for perceptions, I think it is quite likely that we will need to be staying virtual longer. But one of the things I am encouraged by is that the rates are dropping. And so one of the things we started implementing is proposals. So for instance, Mr. Carlton mentioned about his desire that he wants to see cross-country come back. So this is exactly what the proposal process is designed for. So I shared with our administrative team a form that they can complete if they have a proposal such as, hey, I feel it's safe to bring cross-country back and here's how we're going to make it safe. And it's a very detailed proposal that goes through and it tells us who it impacts, why it's important for them to come back, what are the benefits of them coming back, what are the risks of them coming back, and vice versa. What are the benefits of them staying home and what are the risks of them staying home? And just looking at the whole picture, what safety protocols are they going to suggest that they could put in place? How are they going to keep people safe? How are they going to monitor that those things are being done safely and that what they say they're going to do actually gets done? And then any other information that they want to share with us, such as if there's maybe for some activities there may be transportation involved or something like that. So we just kicked that off. I've already gotten a few proposals. And so we have a team at central office who will be looking at those. And then it'll be kind of a back and forth, right? So when we have questions or we feel like, hey, this isn't detailed enough, or we don't think you went far enough, or maybe we think you went too far and you can include more kids or something, right? Like whatever that feedback is, we'll go back and forth with folks and see if we can come to an agreement of a way to get whatever that thing is back. So some examples are the in-person testing, for instance, and I hate to use the word testing because people automatically think you're getting a nose swab, and that's not the kind of testing I'm talking about. Like the psychological testing, for instance, or things like that. So put together a proposal, explain how we're going to do it safely, and if we approve it, you can start doing it. Or Another example would be the cross country. Put together a proposal, explain all these things, and if we approve it, you can start doing it. And so the advantage of the proposal process is it allows us to kind of slowly transition back to some of these things. We're still putting all the same scrutiny into it as we would any of the larger scale decisions, but it allows us to try some things out and see how it works. And some of them we might try and we feel it doesn't work well, and others we might say it might motivate us to try some other things. And so I'm really excited to have this in place. We are going to have a repository on the website where we're going to post these proposals. So once they're approved, anybody who wants to know what's been approved can go look at it, and they can read what all the measures are. They can give us feedback on, hey, we think you missed the mark here, or this sounds great, why aren't you doing it in this other area, or whatever. So those proposals are hopefully going to be a great way to help us start transitioning back to at least some in-person activities. But I think we all know how important it is to try to get some of that happening with our kids. A couple things to share. One is, I just want to give kind of 2 heads up to the board and the community as our discussions have gotten more in depth in these areas into specifics of exactly what is going to happen when. I've got to tell you that the more I look at the hybrid approach, the more I think that it's not the best of both worlds, it's the worst of both worlds. And there are a lot of challenges with going into a hybrid approach. And so I just want to share that. And as one example is, if you remember from the town hall, the example I shared of in a hybrid, the kids go Monday, Tuesday, and then they're off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or they're off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they go in person Thursday, Friday. That kid now has gone from having 5 days of instruction with their teacher to having 2 days of instruction and then 3 days self-supporting. And I'm not sure that's an improvement. And so we're trying to come up with creative ways to address that in ways that we can still start transitioning to those in-person activities, but also not take away, because there are a lot of great things happening on virtual learning right now. And so we want to be careful not to, have the camel be the horse made by a committee, right? And so just trying to work through those things. So one of the things I threw out there today with cabinet was, I mean, should we even consider just saying, do people want certainty, right? Do we need to say to folks, all right, virtual is working, we figured out a lot of this, let's continue this through the semester, and then hope that we can come back in January full in person and skip the hybrid phase. So I think that's one thing we really have to seriously consider. But along with it, I think if, let's say we went that direction, there's a lot of other things we need to do as well, right? There are folks who cannot continue supporting their child at home in virtual learning. They have to have another alternative. And so we talked with the YMCA folks recently about a program they're doing where they basically are creating some of these learning pods like you've heard of other folks creating, but they're doing it within the buildings. And so that's something we would explore, for instance. For those who need that support, how can we put that support in place? Because I know for many people, the idea of virtual learning through the end of the semester sounds great. For other people, it sounds like a nightmare, right? And so we've got to figure out, if we went a direction like that, what would that look like, right? And how would we end up doing that? So I just want to throw that out there just so you're aware. We are really trying to play devil's advocates with our own ideas and really push them around. And we are doing a lot of prodding and considering and talking through a lot of different situations. And so I don't know exactly where we're leaning for a decision by September 18th, but I am, from what I'm looking at in the data so far, just want to give a heads up that most likely I think we will probably be remaining in a virtual posture with a lot of hopefully proposals so that we can start bringing kids back to various things. So wanted to share that. One of the questions that came up in comment was about why not temperature checks, and I think it's a great question, and it's something we're still working through. It's not off the table completely if we're able to get back. Some of it may be if we are doing this more small scale proposal, it might be more easily facilitated to do temperature checks. Part of it is being able to get the equipment. Part of it is the time that it takes to do, and so Some of us may have experienced temperature checks going out to different places, and on a small scale, it works pretty well. On a large scale, it gets pretty laborious, and it reminds me of my time in Kansas City when all the kids had to go through metal detectors, and a process that should have gone really quickly suddenly took 40 minutes to get every kid into the school. So it's just something for us to take into consideration, what that looks like. So, and then another question that has come up a lot is when it gets to the point that as a parent, if I have to decide to keep my kid virtual, even though the school is going back to hybrid or in person, the parents really need to know what that decision looks like, and I agree completely. So at this point, we don't know the details, and that's why we haven't shared them. We're still trying to figure out some of the logistics. A great example came up today of if your kid is in a very specialized high school class and there's only one teacher in the district who teaches that class, and 3 of the kids want to stay home virtual and the other 15 are coming in person, does that now put the onus on that teacher to teach both virtual and in person? Or are we not able to offer that class virtually? So there's some situations like that we're having to work through and try to figure out the logistics of what that looks like. And so we will be sharing details before a parent has to say, all right, I'm going with the decision or I'm keeping my kid home. We will have considerably more details, like if my kid switches teachers, do they switch back when they come back, or do they stick with where they were? Those are all great questions and things that we're working out. So I shared with staff earlier today, it's really good. We've had our Beyond Diversity training because we are all experiencing discomfort and we are all having to accept non-closure. And that's something we learned about with our racial diversity training. And it's something we're having to apply here because all of us are trying to grasp onto certainty, right? And we really want some certain outcomes in an uncertain world. And so that makes it very difficult. So do know we hear you. We really appreciate the input folks are providing to us, emailing, calling, etc. So we do monitor all of that and we pay attention to all of that feedback. We may not have all the certainty that you want at this point, but by the time you have to start making decisions based on decisions we're making, we will make sure we have absolutely as much certainty as we possibly can be at that time. So that's kind of the gist. I wanted to share, our previous updates have been very much past focused, and I think it's just time to start looking at future focused. So that's the reason for a different style update tonight, so that folks know kind of where our thinking is and where we see us going next. So I'm happy to answer questions about any of that. I know it was a lot to go through all at once. So any questions I can cover or any comments?
James?
Yeah, our special needs students, those that are probably special, either qualify for one-on-one care or whatever. You didn't speak about that, and I know. Go on, that's it, that's the question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I don't know if Frances is on or not, but she is working very diligently with her team. They have put a spreadsheet together that I'm even intimidated by, and you know how much I like spreadsheets, of tracking every single kid and trying to figure out how they can serve that kid's needs. And so it's in the works. As you saw in our phase diagrams from the town hall and from our district dispatch, they are very early in our phases for exactly that reason, because we really want to try to start delivering those services that are best done in person for those groups of kids as soon as possible. So it's in the works. I don't have the specifics at this point. We are working through some of the logistics, but yeah, that is definitely a very high priority group.
Okay, so if we are going through this amazing spreadsheet and putting it together, is there a step to reach out to those parents? Because for some of them, it's not even best, it's possible, you know, it's such a sense of frustration.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing is, so yes, one of the things that I did ask Frances to do is make sure we touch base with the families that are impacted. And one of the reasons I asked her that is because we're actually seeing two kind of polar opposites of preferences. We have the families who are very adamant their kid has to be in school and has to be served there. And then we have the ones who are very hesitant to send their kid back to school. So that gets very complicated if you have a teacher who only teaches 4 students and 3 of them are adamant about staying home and 1 of them is adamant about coming in. We get into that same situation again of a teacher who's expected to do 2 things at once. And so we're having to navigate that, and that's part of the complication. But yeah, the family preferences are very important. And luckily, this is a small enough group that we can reach out to the families individually to make sure we understand what it is they're facing and what their preferences are. We may not be able to meet all of those preferences on the timeline that they would like us to, because we are having to accommodate other families too. But it is something that we're very interested in what their preferences are for their child.
Have you all potentially discussed, and I don't know how many different school districts are doing this, but potentially discussed a teacher being in the classroom and teaching the class and having, a computer, a video into that classroom. And then that way she or he is teaching to the entire class, whether they are at home or in the classroom. Is that something that the team is looking at as well? Or does that present some complications?
It's a great question. And in fact, it came up when we were talking about that example I gave earlier of the super specialized class and 3 kids who need to stay home and the other 15 can come in. That is one potential solution, right? That way you're not putting the burden on the teacher of having to come up with 2 completely different modes. I will tell you anecdotally, I've experienced that myself being the online person. One of my grad school programs was delivered that way, and they asked me to be the guinea pig to try, I'm going to be online while the rest of the class is in person. And it was horrendous because they just forgot about me online. And so I was really just a spectator. I had no way to ask questions. I had no way to interact with my peers. Now, things have come a long way. That was probably 20 years ago now, and maybe we can figure out better ways to do it. It is something that we have talked about, and it may be something that we do more on those one-off situations where we might not be able to offer the class otherwise, and so it's the best we're going to be able to do. But it's not an ideal situation. I think you've probably noticed, as the teachers are doing the online learning, there's a lot of specialized skills involved in delivering the curriculum online. And so while it might be a stopgap measure to have some kind of device so a kid can basically watch the class happen in front of them, I wouldn't want to do that too long term because I don't think it's the best option, but it may be something that could get us through a short time period.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
Lewis has a question.
I've got a few. Heather, do you want to go?
Really, James and Tasha hit on my questions. I just, in particular, the town hall I thought was helpful, and just wanted to emphasize that I appreciate that you created a first tier that included the students who need it most, who are not successful with the online learning. And I appreciate that you're considering ways like the pods in buildings and like the special consideration for getting them in sooner to help address that need. So thank you very much for thinking of that.
So let's see, I wanted to make a couple comments, and actually I don't have too many questions in some. But the first is when you showed the charts, the very helpful charts about the trends and the COVID rates. I just wanted to mention, maybe for you or maybe for those listening, we need to be very aware not only of the past trends, but the predictions for the future course of the virus. And I'm sure that you're aware, the Washington Post reported on models prepared. I can't remember whether it was, I won't say because I don't remember the author of the study. But basically there's a prediction for a major spike in the fall. It might not happen, but even as the trend nationally is going down, 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 at least some are currently predicting a major spike, as it's always been predicted for the fall, with the idea that the virus is going to spread more effectively in cold, drier climates as people move inside. And we need to factor that into our thinking, that it might seem now based on the past month that we're in good shape, but add Labor Day to the fall spike, and who knows what's going to happen.
And while you're on the topic, that's exactly why we talk to epidemiologists and other scientists and things. That's a perfect example of why we need their input on, here's what we see as amateur epidemiologists, which I feel like I am now, but what do the actual people say, right? Like, what do they feel is happening? It's a great point.
And thankfully, we're blessed with the wealth of those people here in Decatur, so we need to tap that resource, which I know we're doing. And the other is that I was excited to hear about the proposal process. I think that's terrific. I think that is exactly what we need to be doing. And in terms of, you know, letting people make a proposal and find a way to get kids back together, both whether for school, for class, for extracurricular. And I wanted to ask if we've got the support that we need from the health professionals, that same community, to vet these proposals and to help people develop them. Central office staff has a lot on their plate, and I would think that to the extent we could use additional resources, that we should provide them, so that if there's a way to make these proposals better and stronger and get them approved more quickly, you know, if we can throw some resources at that, I for one would be in favor of doing it. I like to hear that you're going to put these up as examples so that, you know, successful proposals will be used as models. I'd like, you know, maybe we could be, we've got universities that are, you know, basically laboratories for this right now all over the country. And so let's go find out which, and some of them even have a little bit of experience to draw from. So let's find out which ones have been successful and use those as models and post those as an example too. But anyway, generally I was very appreciative of this proposal. I think it's great. And I wanted to mention that the last one is along the same lines, which is learning pods, that I still have a strong interest in that concept, which is that, you know, even if instruction is going to continue to be virtual, some kids are going to do better virtual learning in person. You know, so if you've got a small number of kids essentially in a proctored hall where we can provide the technology and whatever those resources are, that they're in an environment, they get out of bed, they go to school, they're there in the same room with their 4, 5, 6 other kids. I don't know how many it is. You know, so that's the kind of proposal that I really hope we can lean into. But my final comment is on the temperature checks. I think that I mean, it does seem like a logistical nightmare to take everyone's temperature. It also seems foolhardy to rely on all everyone to take their own. And it seems like, given this importance of these kinds of protocols and ensuring that we have a safe environment, that, again, we need to figure out a way to make it happen. And in the same way that Chick-fil-A seems to be able to make their drive-in line work more quickly than anybody else, you know, surely there's a way that we can figure out how to get the temperature checks done efficiently. And I just would suggest that we work hard on that as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'll tell you, there's no share of vendors who have come up with products they want to sell you to help speed along those temperature checks. I saw one the other day. It basically looks like a metal detector. And as you walk through, it beeps if it senses that your body temperature is too high or something like that. So there may be some things like that. We will continue exploring that. One of the challenges we ran into is for quite a while, and I'm not sure it's changed, we just couldn't even get the equipment. So even if we had decided that, hey, you know, let's say we do it at the teacher level, before you walk in the classroom, you have a temperature check. That way it limits how many kids have to be done simultaneously. There was no way we could get the devices to do it. And so we'll keep working on that, but it is a great point.
And I appreciate the direction. It was a good report, and so thank you for all that you've done so far. Those are just my comments on it.
Awesome. So are there any concerns with the stuff I shared in terms of the direction we're going? It sounds like we're all on the same page, but I just want to double check because that September 18th is going to be here before we know it. So if there's any thoughts that we're not approaching this correctly, I'd love to hear it so we can change course and adjust accordingly. All right. Awesome. Very good. Well,
Our
thank
next
you all.
item,
Appreciate it.
this moves us to the senior exemption. And so I think we'll ask James, who led the committee, to lead this part of the discussion.
Well, I mean, we have a presentation here from representatives from the committee. I believe, I'll give the floor to them. David, looks like you're finding them. You were Eston.
Yeah, I found Hans and Paula. I wasn't sure. Hans, is there anyone else that we need to give access?
No, I think Paula will open us up, and then I'll run us through the couple of slides.
Oh, there's Paula.
We
Good.
both can take
Give them
questions.
the floor.
Okay, awesome.
Well,
Paula, why don't you want to unmute? Sorry, James.
I guess while she unmutes, I want to thank all of the members of the committee during the summer. I know we put together. It was our last meeting in person at the beginning of the March as an executive session, and then an open discussion where we talked about the committee, and then we all met in person. And this group met in April and May, and just through the heart of this, and all the committee members were amazing. I had several phone calls with Ms. Wilson, who I would call and get feedback to, and Bill Floyd, who would call in on his terrible internet connection and give us his opinion. But I'm once again just reminded I mean, we talked about CDC being right here, and we can rely on this, but just the people we have in this city who are dedicated to making it a great place. I think it's great. And so thank you all for all you do. So I'll shut up.
Well, thank you, James. I'd also like to thank the members of the committee, because I think this is actually the first time I've ever done anything this complex, and we never got together in person. So there was good perseverance among this group to keep zooming along, if you will, and I'm grateful for that. I'm also grateful to live in a community where people are willing to share their skills and talents and time in an effort to try to support our community and help our community be the best it can be. So I think this committee was a good example of just that. I believe after a lot of data crunching and a lot of discussion and a lot of try this, try that, I believe that we finally came to reasonable recommendations that at least strike a balance, or try to strike a balance between the needs of CSD and the needs of our greater community. So Hans was the data wizard on this, so I'm going to ask him if he will to walk us through the very short deck. Please keep in mind that our committee is committed to a more formal report for you all before your next board meeting, but these slides I think will certainly give you a good overview of, and certainly a jumping point for you guys to ask questions.
Can I interrupt for just a second and ask, and I don't mean to catch you off guard, but could we just name the members of the committee so that everyone knows who has been contributing their time and came up with this recommendation?
Yes, if I had that page open. Somebody else may have that open. I don't know.
I have it open, actually, if you want me
All
to
right.
go through it. Sure. So Meg Robinson, Bill Floyd, Maria Pinkleton, the estimable Paula Collins, Phil Cuffey, Dr. Sheila Payton, Gwyn Hall, myself, Hans Utz, and Elizabeth Wilson, obviously Mayor Emerita of the city.
Thank you.
Those were all the designated members of the committee.
Thanks.
If somebody would allow me to share screen, I can go through the slides, or if somebody wants to pull the couple slides up and share it, I can kind of talk over.
I just made you co-host, Hans. Maybe that's what you need to be able to do presentation. See if you can do it now.
Is what needs to be done. Can everyone see
There we
the
go.
slides that just came up? All right, so this is the PDF. It's clipping it, isn't it? Are you able to see? Is everyone able to see the full page?
Right now, we're seeing the bottom of one page and the top of the next page.
Let me.
There, we're seeing the whole page.
There we go.
Yep, perfect.
If it's going to allow me to. No, well, here. I'll tell you what, I'm going to stop off. I'm going to open a PowerPoint because it actually wants to be presented as opposed to a PDF, which just wants to annoy me. That would be probably the right way to do this. Okay. And here we go. How is that?
That's perfect.
Okay, so just a quick bit of background around what the exemption was for the public that may be watching this. It's actually a school tax exemption for all seniors, for resident homeowners in the city of Decatur age 65 and older. The reason why this exemption was created, we had a large public discussion as a community and ultimately voted on it, was to first help maintain the senior population in Decatur as residents. And then the second was to attempt to slow some of the influx of elementary grade school kids coming into the system to not overburden the schools. And over the course of the 5 years that this exemption has been in place, the system has done a study on it, and we found, unfortunately, that actually the exemption did not impact either one of those two objectives. And if anyone is interested in reading more about that, the report is publicly available as a part of the work that we're doing here. So the impact of this exemption on the budget, if you take a look at all of the previous exemptions that were in place, and these are in 2019 dollars, the anticipated impact of the previous exemptions were approximately $3.1 million. So this is money that the school system anticipated not having due to existing exemptions. The estimate for the impact of the new exemption, the one that went in place a few years ago, was expected to be approximately $1.2 million. Instead, it actually cost an additional $3.1 million to the school system. So there was an unanticipated or unexpected additional cost of approximately $1.9 million to the system in 2019. And so it's this $1.9 million that the school system has asked the committee to put forward a proposal on how to bring some of that back. The impact to the schools it's impactful, right? I mean, so in 2019 there was a millage increase to close the budget, so we went from 18.65 to 20.21 mils. There's a $8.7 million expected dip into the reserves in fiscal year 21. Now, that's, not all of that is necessarily due to the senior exemption, of course, right? COVID is obviously putting us in a position where precautions have to be made. And then, operational and programmatic cuts at the schools as well. So these combination of things are some of the impacts that the exemption has had. So our charter has been to bring this $1.1 million back. We additionally feel it's extremely important, given that the original intent of the exemption was to protect seniors and to, in particular, help disadvantaged or vulnerable seniors be able to stay in the city of Decatur. We felt it incumbent upon us to put forward a proposal that rigorously protected those particular individuals from rising school costs. And then we also felt it was incumbent upon us to do as much as we possibly could within the dollars that were left to try to protect or preserve as much of the existing exemption in tax relief for the remaining seniors in Decatur. And so here is what we are putting forward. That we are looking at 2 exemptions to replace the existing one. So within the age group of age 65 to 69, we introduce an exemption that is needs-based, focused on the vulnerable and disadvantaged seniors, with some tied to federal income with annual adjustments, either based on average median income or the median family income of the Decatur area. And then assign an exemption value vis-a-vis the home value that is actually reflective of current home values. If you remember, the exemptions that were in place previously were, $10,000 and $20,000 based on home values from 1984. So we're obviously going to be recommending that this get adjusted for 2020 home values and then have an annual adjustment going forward as well. For the seniors that are age 70 plus, we felt it's extremely important that anyone moving from the 65 to 69 into the 70 plus cohort, that their exemption at least stay as high as it is in the 65, or as it was in the 65 to 69 group. And then the balance, excuse me, of the exemption will be allocated to all residents, all senior residents age 70 plus with minimum caps. We have some belief that in that cohort of 70 plus, we actually can preserve the vast majority of the exemption as it exists today. Meaning that if you are currently not paying any school taxes in that under the current exemption and you're over 70, we have a reasonable expectation that in this projected exemption that we're putting forward, that would continue, and that we would be able to preserve that. So a couple of things to point out, right? So I think that it's a fair question. Anybody that is reading this is going to ask, so who takes it on the chin, right? If we're pulling $2 million back, $1.9 million back, where is that coming from? And the reality is it is in that 65 to 69 cohort. If it's not needs-based, if you are above the income and the house value proposed that we're putting forward, that based on the analysis that needs to be done, then you will continue to pay the school taxes until you reach age 70 and are able to take advantage of the full exemption. For all practical purposes, we are pushing the current senior exemption out from age 65 to age 70 plus, and maintaining just a smaller exemption in the 65 to 69 that is very, very much focused on needs-based. A couple of things to keep in mind, because I'm sure questions are going to come forward from here. There is a substantial amount of analysis that needs to be done behind this that the commission ourselves were not equipped to do, right? So there's going to need to be proper, not just who has taken the exemptions in the past, but what are the incomes of the individuals that are going to be in this range? What are the appropriate income caps that we're talking about for these different contingency or these different exemptions? And how much ought to be allocated to the two buckets in terms of what the anticipated costs were. I know the analysis that was done in the original case was based upon the best information that was available at the time. But we're going to have to do a deeper dive on the data this time to make sure that we're actually getting to the nuance of income and need and just the number of households that meet the various limits. We're also going to continue with the recommendation that these exemptions be periodically reevaluated, whether it's on a 3-year or a 5-year window of time. We would like to move away, if it is possible, from a full-blown expiration that requires an entirely new piece of legislation in front of the delegation. We're not clear whether that's a possibility yet. We are certainly looking into it. Very obviously, I think we as a community would prefer that we're able to have this conversation as a community, as opposed to having to go back to the delegation every 5 years to tweak. But if it's not possible, we are still going to recommend that we have some built-in expiration so that we are forced into a function of reevaluating this every couple of years. Just to make sure that we're very similar to what this commission has done, making the adjustments and the modifications to it to keep it in a place where it's targeted against the individuals that need it, and that it's having the impact that we anticipate it to have. So that is, I can step out of it and stop sharing if this screen will permit me to. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll leave this up in case questions come up and we can move back and forth and reference. That is the sum of our primary recommendations. As Paula mentioned, we'll be making a more detailed report that has some perspective on what the draft language might look like, as well as a lot more detail around what analysis needs to be done to support the nuanced recommendations going forward. Any questions?
Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Paula, very much for a good report and for a lot of work that went into coming up with those. I do have questions. Others will have. I'm going to see if others, and I can only see. Let me see if I can actually see faces. Here. Who'd like to start?
I can start, but I probably will start and then pause and let others jump in. But I wonder, to begin with, maybe David, you could help us by sharing the charge that was originally given to the committee.
Yes, let me track that down real quick.
And I know that it was shared in the June meeting because I was on that call, and I've listened to the meetings. I think James called me a nerd for having listened to the meetings, but I thought it was important not just to hear the recommendation that came out of it, but I really appreciate Hans and Paula and the rest of the committee, all the thought that went into your recommendations. I did think that you took into consideration many of the things that we also are concerned about, including particularly just how we can have a reasonable and responsible solution to providing this tax relief, balancing what it means to the seniors with what it means to the school system, with what it means to the rest of the taxpayers who fund this exemption. So I know that, it's a delicate balance between those two things because we value all of those things, and there's only so much money that can go around. So it was very insightful to listen to the deliberation that went on and to appreciate how you are trying to focus this on the most vulnerable seniors so we can have the greatest impact. Let me know, David, when you have that up, or just, I guess it will just appear, right?
It should be there. Do you see it now?
Yeah, thanks. So it's down kind of
the part,
at section 6. Yeah.
There we go.
So I just want to take a minute to just review what the board asked of the committee, because we put a lot of thought into this, and we're hoping to get these answers because unfortunately we don't have unlimited time. We have a pretty fixed timeline actually to get a recommendation that we can put forth in the legislative language that we need to put forth to already be communicating with our legislators who will then be in session at the start of the year, and we need their support to pass this. So we need something concrete, and we were hoping to have these things at this meeting. I see we're not quite there yet, but I know there's a lot of thought behind what you showed us tonight, and you said you're working on a more detailed report. But I really want to look at this together because I think we need to make sure that we are all on the same page as to what the board is expecting and needing from the committee. I think we've accomplished you know, we're working on 6A. 6B, I think we'd like to hear a little bit more about the committee's plans for the public involvement process to ensure that the Decatur community has had an opportunity to participate in this conversation. I know all the meetings that the committee had were open and that anyone was welcome to attend. I'm just not sure we've reached everyone that will want to weigh in. I know there was talk on the committee call in August that there are other avenues that we might need to explore because Zoom isn't accessible to everyone. And so I'd like to hear more about that. Number 7, you hit on that. I think it's important that we continue to build in an opportunity to reevaluate. And then number 8, I think is really critical here. We requested to receive recommendations that could be evaluated using the Tableau tool. And this is the tool that was in that Georgia State report. And there are many reasons for this. One, a couple of years ago, we began exploring this and we quickly realized that there's a lot of data out there, but it's not easily accessible to us and it's not processed and manipulated and manipulatable easily by us or understood. So a couple of years ago, we created an RFP and we put that out there and we had several universities and companies reply and we picked the most qualified one, which was Georgia State. And they put together this report and we specifically asked them for a tool that we could use because we realized one of the most critical things that's going to come out of this is our recommendation. And we need a recommendation that we are able to quantify so that we don't put ourselves in the same situation going forward. And a substantial amount of work went into this report for many, many months, almost a year, several iterations and reviewed by the school board. And we felt that this was a tool that was dependable with the best available data put together by experts in the field, yet simple enough that we could manipulate it, put in several scenarios, and get an estimate that we believe would be reasonably accurate that we could support and get behind. My concern with the report tonight is that while I think the recommendations are thoughtful, I think they're more in line with item 9, which we're not seeing here, but which may be a next iteration for future iterations of the senior tax exemption that are more sophisticated. And I'm saying that because my concern is that while they may be thoughtful and take into consideration a lot of the concerns that the committee had, I don't know that we can quantify them. And particularly, I'm not sure that we can quantify them within the amount of time that we have, which is very limited since we do need to make sure that we get this legislated in this upcoming session. Otherwise, as we know, the current exemption will sunset, and that is not our intention to allow that to happen. So I guess my question coming out of all of this is, how can we take this time to ensure that we've met the charge, particularly, and I'd say the 2 biggest points are community involvement and also providing the board with some recommendations that we can quantify using this Tableau tool. And then certainly we can explore these additional recommendations and we can see whether we are able to get them quantified in a way that we can feel comfortable with in order to move forward with them. But in case we are not, we definitely would like to have some recommendations using that tool and that study so that we do feel comfortable that we have something that we can put a price tag on that we can support moving forward in order to protect our taxpayers while providing the kind of tax relief that our community recommends in regards to what age limit, whether or not we have an income limit, and also the exemption amount that we could provide. And that exemption amount, just to clarify, it's not saying that anyone with a certain value of house is exempt if they're over that value. It's more that this is the allowable exemption that we would give to everyone. Say, for example, you have a house that's assessed at, you know, 400,000 and someone else has a house that's assessed at $1 million. You would both get it if you were of the right age and income level, but you would get the same amount. So whatever exemption amount would be recommended, let's say that it's $200,000, just to throw that out there, then both parties would get the first $200,000 of their assessed value exempted. So I just wanted to make clear what that meant. And, you know, in case anyone was confusing, that was saying that we were capping it at a certain home value. That's not what we were building into this tool. So those are my concerns, and I'll let anyone else on the board ask questions and chime in, but I'm hoping that we can work with this report that the committee is still working on and make sure that we're satisfying the charge.
So I have a suggestion, I think, Hans, and then I'll give you a chance to respond, which is that it might help to think, you know, where we are, as Heather said, is that we need legislative language that could be introduced at the beginning of the session, which begins basically right at the first of the year. And so we need to be in a position to have that language at the ready. The reason that we had set the September deadline is so that we could begin to socialize it with our delegation. The good news is that, you know, there's a little bit of slack in that, and so we can take that slack. We set September 1 with the idea that you know, we might not meet that deadline and we'd have a little bit of time. So we're going to be okay. But we do have to have specific numbers and specific legislative language that we can first vet with our community through a public process. The committee is a public process, but what we think we need is to have a, you know, specific proposal with specific numbers that we can then run up the flagpole, have sort of a process where the community at large can speak to us and we can listen and take the time to respond to it. If you back up the clock, to have something ready for the session, I guess I would suggest that if we get any later than, you know, November 30, we're not going to have any time to talk with people, with the delegation. And this is not going to be easy. We have issues. And so we can't assume that this is just going to happen. We're going to actually need to explain why this is the right thing to our delegation to get their support for this. So if we set November 30 as a point when we have a fully vetted, you know, Decatur proposal, and then back it up and say, you know, when do we need to have numbers and specifics in order to meet that goal? I guess I'd suggest that we would need that by the 1st of November at a minimum. If you had, this is aggressive even then, but if you had by 1st of November a proposal that you could run out for you know, public notice, we can have a special session to let people speak to us about it. That would give us time to get their comments and make the necessary adjustments. I mean, I think that would work, and I really don't know what else we're going to do at this point. And so that would give us then about a week, you know, a month and a half, 6 weeks to come up with these specific numbers. And so the question is, how can we reduce the proposal, which I like? How can we put numbers on it so that we can not only have something specific for people to respond to, but that we can also plug into the tool that we developed for the purpose to evaluate the cost. It's not perfect, but
if I could actually address that, right? Let me go ahead and step in and
Sure.
talk a little bit about the tool, because we keep going back to reference that as if that was going to be helpful, and it's not. I mean, you should disabuse everyone of that right now. We broke the tool in the first 2 weeks, I think. By the second meeting, we realized it wasn't going to be functionally usable for the answer that you needed for this particular work. Simple things like allowing you to adjust 2 of the factors at the same time differently, you couldn't do. We couldn't find out how many seniors were being impacted by it. We couldn't get a net number of what the total impact was going to be. So the tool wasn't helpful, bluntly. And if we're committed to saying that we have to use the tool to arrive at the math to make this work, then I do despair of us coming to an answer. It's not going to be able to deliver the math that you need to have. And I'm sorry that I'm reporting that out to you at this point. I thought this was better understood. That said, that doesn't mean we're not in a position to be able to figure the math out. I do think it's going to involve hiring either consultant or support for analysis that can actually take a look at what is the actual income of individuals and how do you build out, how many people are going to be in each of these buckets based upon what these parameters are. The questions that we thought the tool was going to be able to answer, but that it turns out it can't. And, I think when it was very early on, Paula, if I'm not mistaken, we went back with a couple specific questions about information that we needed to get out of the tool and found out that it wasn't available. We'd have to rehire the group to be able to do that. That may be the answer. Maybe we put forward what we're looking to do and use the same group to develop the tool to provide some of the analytics behind what we're trying to do. The tool itself it doesn't have the parameters or the flexibility built in to hit the kind of nuance that we're talking about doing in this particular.
So to be clear, it's not about using the tool necessarily. It's about quantifying the impact. And we can talk about what needs to happen to get that done. But I'm not wedded to using the tool. I'm wedded to going into this with our eyes open.
Good. So
that we have the numbers. The problem that we've got is that we don't have time to do another RFP. We might have time to go back to the group at Georgia State and ask them to revise the tool as might be needed to generate the numbers that we need. But again, it's not perfect, but that's not where we are. Where we are is that we need something, and otherwise this exemption is going to sunset. And so we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And so just because everything's not perfect could result that we have no proposal, and that's not going to help anybody.
I understand, just so that I could say this, Louis, just for the record, that is absolutely fully understood. But by the same token, we are a commission that exists because the analysis was not done correctly the first time. So I do think it's incumbent upon us to take the steps necessary to actually get the numbers correct. And I'm glad to hear you saying that that's the steps that you're looking for us to be able to do. Let's go ahead and do that analysis. I think that putting something forward that's half-baked, that doesn't work mathematically, just propagates the problem another 5 years down the road and potentially puts the school system in another situation of risk where the exemption's costing substantially more.
We're in agreement with that. The question is whether we have time to get it fully baked at this point. And so,
I would just clarify, I'm not sure I'm totally in agreement with that. I don't think, Georgia State's not here to explain why their tool is not as inaccurate as Hans is sharing, but I do agree that there were questions that came up in the committee that the tool was not designed to answer. I totally agree with that. And so the questions that the committee was interested in answering, the tool wasn't the way to do that. I don't agree that the tool is completely unusable. I do think there are questions that it does answer. And I think that's what Heather's point was, that was the desire was, at least answer a question, like using the actual data, so that we didn't end up in a situation where we had a proposal with no analytics behind it. I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Heather, but I think that's what I heard you saying was, yes, the analytics are very complicated and the tool didn't answer the specific direction the committee wanted to go. But I think the point of going through the charge was that there was a desire for at least a proposal with those analytics behind it, as an example. So just to clarify.
I have a suggestion.
To jump in there, because this is relevant, David, the proposal is continue the exemption for those who are 70-year-old as is. And then using the tool, the committee went back and looked at the math that they did on their own and compared it to the Tableau tool, correct? I mean, jump in if I'm wrong, and said that there were just some discrepancies, or they had some questions, and reached out to Georgia State about whether they lined up or not with what they were looking at, and then think that if that, based on their math and what they're looking at with the Tableau tool, if we write the exemption that way, there's some room for some 65 to 70 language in addition to that. Is that
So
correct?
can I ask if I heard what you said?
I'm not sure I quite followed that, but that's not exactly my recollection of what the questions were, if that's what your question is.
Well, I feel like we're not, Hans and Paula have presented that we continue the exemption for 70 and older. That was a starting point that was reached at age 3, and then week 3, and then Hans went through with the help of some committee members. I saw them here, Mr. Grimes and Paul, et cetera, and said, all right, let's look and let's do, because Lewis, you said you don't want to throw any half-baked back of the envelope math here. Let's compare the numbers that we have with what that's showing and what it gets us, and then just saw some discrepancies and have come up with a proposal that we do that, and think that there's some extra wiggle room there.
No, I know. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I understand that point. I think the question for me is that the assumption is that Georgia State is wrong and we're right. And I think there's some hubris in that we need to check and and maybe bring in, maybe that's why we need some additional expertise there.
Let me just clarify, because that is not at all my position, and I want to make sure that's clear in a public meeting. I don't think Georgia State's analysis was wrong. I do think actually in the areas where the tool was capable of covering what we did, it lined up with the actual analysis that we did quite well. The problem was it wasn't nuanced enough to move the levers in the way that we're making as the ultimate suggestion that we're putting here. When I was referencing incorrect analysis, it was from what underpinned the previous exemption, where the proof is in the pudding. We're obviously surprised by the fact that there is $2 million of additional costs that we didn't anticipate. So in the effort to not arrive at that particular point again, I do absolutely think that the data exists, whatever the engine is that holds the data that gets represented in the Tableau tool, that data can underpin the analysis that we need to do here and have it done correctly. I have no question about that. It really is fundamentally around households by income and home values. And to the extent that we can have a much more nuanced conversation around that data as opposed to the limitations in the tool, I think that we can get this solved. I mean, this is a week or so of analysis. It's not a substantial amount of work, I don't think, especially if they're given the directives. And the other thing to say is that there is actually a substantive amount of analysis done on the core data set. Like, we have the actual full digest of all Decatur taxes paid since 2012 by address, by age, right? Or not by age, but by individuals that took the various exemptions. And so we have what we think is a very strong starting point for the dollar amounts that ought to be assigned to both of these buckets. The reason why it is not in the presentation that you're seeing today is because that approach was precisely what led us awry the last time. There is more analysis that must be done with a properly vetted database, with the appropriate checks and balances and data integrity work that data scientists will know how to do, that can get that number correct. And so I think we're closer maybe than these slides have maybe given some of you guys concern about. I do think this is a matter of, say 2 weeks. If you said go tomorrow and I got on the phone with the people that were going to do the analysis, I would expect that they would have something back to us in about 2 weeks that we would be able to then drop into legislation, drafted appropriately and circulate.
So I appreciate that clarification. So thank you for making that. And I just want to make sure. So it's not that the tool was giving inaccurate data, it's that it couldn't give the data that the committee was seeking.
Yes,
and I think that's just important because, and the reason I'm pushing on it is because I do think it's been popular ever since this study came out to say this can't be right, this can't be right, this can't be right. And there have been people throughout the community doing that. And so I think it is important to clarify the difference between a tool that was built to our specifications that can't answer the questions as we now want them asked, and a tool that is providing inaccurate information. So I appreciate you clarifying that, because I don't want people to get confused between the two, because they're two very different situations. So thank you.
They are, and just for utter emphasis, it is the fact that the tool doesn't answer the question the way that we're asking. It is not that it's giving us incorrect information. That is correct.
As a path forward, I'm wondering what we need to do. And I think what I would suggest is that we park the discussion for now. This is just a suggestion, but that we convene a work session with the board and the committee in short order, like just as soon as we can get it together, in order to talk about next steps. And at the same time, we're going to need to begin to, if we're going to try to get more analysis from the team at GSU, we're going to need to start finding out what their availability is, because they might have 2 weeks to devote to this full on, or they might not. And we need to start that. And so,
and Hans and I talked about that earlier, and we're ready to go and get on the phone with them and talk through. Hans is very well versed in exactly what the questions are that need to be able to be answered, so he could represent that very well. And he had shared that he's willing to do that. So if that's the direction you guys are comfortable going, he and I can run with that and get on the phone with Georgia State. I would recommend sticking with Georgia State rather than trying to find somebody new. I do think they have the data that we need. It's just we need them to do it in a way that can answer the questions the way the committee has come up with structuring them. So, and I think the idea of a work session, a joint work session, is a great idea. And that way everybody's talking together about the same thing. So we could do both those things in parallel, So.
And definitely in parallel. Like, that is what makes sense to me, is that y'all start the conversation with Georgia State so that we know what's possible, and that we sort of prime the pump so that they're ready. And at the same time, we should gather as a board and the committee as soon as we can, so that we can ask our questions of one another and get on the same page.
And then my question is, do we feel like we didn't have enough information to start presenting it to the community for their input? So once we, feel like we have more to give them, then possibly bring in more of the community input at that point?
I mean, I think that all the meetings are public. So everybody, anytime we meet and anytime the committee has met, everyone is invited. At the same time, I think that once we have a fully baked proposal, that is a proposal that's got numbers in it, so that any person in the public can look and see how it affects them. At that point, I think that we need to have a broader effort at public engagement so that people actually know what they're responding to. Does that make sense, Tasha?
The slide that Hans did not show you was the next one, which says, here are examples of tax bills for different seniors in different scenarios, but you can't answer that question until you have the % of AMI at a minimum, so that we know where the cutoff is, so that you then can do the scenarios. And yes, Tasha, at that point, then you can engage the community. I don't know how many of you guys remember the Yes to 5 campaign In 2016, I used the Wayback Machine and found the website, and I would anticipate something even similar to this. I don't think we're going to have 5 that we have to go to, but I'm happy to, I don't even know if I can do this on this. Can I get to no, I can't get to a chat. I will share the link with, I don't know, somebody. So I'll send it. I think if I send it to the committee email address, it goes to all of you all as well. I think that's right. So I will use as Shauna got me going, the She South Carolina one. I could never remember it until that. So that has now stuck with me. So thank you. I'll drop that in an email as soon as we're done.
I do think, though, to Tasha's point, it's a good question that we do have some information here. I mean, like, we do have information to begin sharing. I think we're at a point where we should begin to have the conversation with the delegation. We know, like, this is presuming that the board wants to move forward with this basic parameter of these recommendations. Broadly, we're going to try to preserve as much of the current one for people that are 70 and above as possible, and likely all of it. And we're going to have a needs-based one for people 65 to 69. And that I mean, I do recognize when you start to engage the community, the very next question that gets asked is, what does it mean to me? And we don't have the answer to that just yet. So we have to be a little careful about how much we really press the gas on communicating until we can answer that specific question. But in terms of getting the philosophy of it out there, in terms of starting to align the politics of it, particularly with the delegation, in terms of starting to educate influencers and individuals in the community that can carry it forward and get the message into the community, I don't see why we wouldn't be doing that in parallel now.
Completely agree.
I agree with you, Hans, and I do think it's not too soon to start community engagement. And I want to emphasize that it was mentioned during your meetings that not everyone has Zoom. So there are people who have not been able to provide input. So perhaps reaching out at least to some of the groups we know have the means to contact seniors who are not engaged through virtual means to do exactly what you're saying, just inform them. And we also can solicit input. We're getting, a lot of unsolicited input, which is great, through email. We've received probably 100 emails over the past several months. So many people know this is a discussion, but maybe not everyone. So I think it can't hurt to share what we have and also share what we know we don't have, but that it's a work in progress. But some of the levers are pretty basic, like age, income, and how much of a person's assessed value we're talking about exempting if we are considering an exemption-based tax exemption or assessment-based tax exemption. So some of the levers are pretty basic, and we could start gathering community input around those to see just what people feel is the most important place to put that, and do they agree with our sentiment to provide it to the most valuable seniors, and also just educate people about how much it has cost and what we are trying to accomplish with it, which is try to protect the most vulnerable seniors. So I think there's some amount of communicating we can do. I agree, we don't have all the answers yet. And I wanted to also just reiterate how grateful I am to you and your committee. I know you guys have worked very, very hard, and I think you're extremely thoughtful. And I think your proposal is very thoughtful. And I don't want to sound ungrateful by going back to our charge and saying, hey, you didn't meet the charge. I just wanted to emphasize the very concrete nature of what we have to have as an output and how we can get there, realizing fully, thank goodness, it's the beginning of September and we do have a little wiggle room, but we still need to get there. I'm fully supportive of, if we need to go back to Georgia State and say, let's tweak this tool, let's come up with a way to quantify this, as long as we can quantify it. And I think we all agree that we need to know how much this is going to cost before we can get behind it. So that's my number one concern. And I think it sounds like we're all on the same page, and we just kind of have to realign our resources and focus on this.
And I think that just to give you guys a little level of comfort as well, we can, you know, with some wiggle room, put approximate numbers against what we think each of those exemptions ought to cost, which will help us back calculate what we're talking about in terms of income and talking about in terms of exemption level. And so I think that'll just speed things along. And I think we do have a lot of information to hand Georgia State and say, let's kind of back calculate how this is going to fit.
Let's see, my only let's see, maybe I've got 2 or 3 or something like that. But as to the public notice, I completely agree that you know, we've got enough. I mean, you've made a conceptual proposal that, as I said, I really like, and so I think it's a good proposal and a good direction. And yes, we can get comments, and presumably after this meeting, we'll start getting some, and we can request that feedback. I just want to make sure that we leave enough time at the end, because I think that a public comment process that preceded the concrete proposal would be inadequate. And so, yes, we can do that stuff now, and we should. We completely agree that we can begin talking with the delegation to you know, about the concepts, and that we've got enough to do that. Agree 100%. But in the timeline, we must leave, I think, at a minimum 30 days, and ideally more, so that we have really valuable public comment on a concrete proposal. I guess that was the main thing that I was going to say. I wanted to share also, I mean, you know, I appreciate the committee, and I think that as you said, Hans, I mean, the first time that we did this, it really wasn't bad analysis. It was a complete absence of data, at least in any form that was accessible to us at the time. And so what we needed then was you guys, right? And so this is kind of the process that you know, is going to result in a better proposal, and it's going to result in a more refined database and a better analytical engine. And so this is what it's all about, and we've got time, and so we just need to get cracking on it and make it happen. And so, you know, thanks for all that you've put into it. We weren't looking for people who would just come in and not think much about it and throw a proposal over the transom. And so this is exactly what we needed, and we'll make it work. And so let's get on it, and let's go ahead and schedule that work session. As soon as we get off the phone, you know, tomorrow we can send a doodle poll, try to find a time that we can all get together. You guys go ahead and get in touch with Georgia State, and we'll, you know, the public, stay tuned, and we'll be publicizing a schedule for public input as we figure it out.
And I just reached out to Georgia State, so I'll let you guys know as soon as we hear back.
Excellent. So thank you all. Thanks for your work, and appreciate you showing up tonight.
Yeah, thanks for a lot of work on a really tough question. So thank you very much.
Indeed.
I will offer that we had a number of folks who couldn't be in this meeting because of the city commission meeting being rescheduled to tonight. So that was a big conflict for us, for a number of folks on this committee. So just wanted you to know it wasn't lack of interest. It was more of a, okay, you go this way and I'll go that way.
Appreciate that. That's an important meeting too.
Thanks, Paul.
Are there other board comments, or should we move on to our next item, which I think is going to be brief? Okay, so we'll move on. So thanks again to the committee. And the final thing is that we have to come up with a way to get our board training.
So board training plan, the details are there. We have to submit a plan by September 30th. So typically, and so just to clarify, this is for our coming fiscal year, and we can talk a little bit also about the current fiscal year in a second, but for the coming fiscal year, we have to submit a plan. Typically, that it looks very similar each year. It's some of the whole board training for new board members. It's the conferences, things like that. So I'm not too concerned about getting that put together and submitted The one thing I definitely want to touch on is in the midst of putting all this together, Shayna pulled the data and things and noticed that we are short on some hours. And so we have reached out to Zenda Bowie at GSBA. I think almost all of you, at least, maybe not all of you, but most of you have met Zenda. She's pretty awesome. And she is going to do our required whole board governance training, which will get us 3 hours, and could also do additional hours, because when we started looking and seeing almost everybody needs something, I suggested it may be better just to do it together. Rather than, I think you all remember Annie's experience, or many of you remember Annie's experience with the online and all that, you know, the fun that she had and explained. And I think some of you had similar experiences. So we can do that. It just has to be done by September 30th. But I think we will be able to get everybody's hours if we do that working through Zenda. So that's what I would recommend so we can get the hours done for fiscal year 20. And then we can submit a training plan that looks very similar to the others. And like we've said before, like, I think it would be best for us to get on top of it early and try to get those hours early. And this year was crazy, of course, with coronavirus coming in March and all of that, that kind of torpedoed many of our plans. But so maybe we could focus on that in the fall and winter to try to get those hours done as early as possible, so we don't find ourselves in this situation next time. So
one question I have is, you know, normally we get a lot of the hours from conferences, which sometimes we've looked for alternatives that we thought might be more actually valuable in terms of our growth. Last year we sought out, wasn't it last year that we went to the oh shoot, I can't even remember the name of the conference, but in Colorado?
Yep. So that we don't get credit for.
Because it's out of state, so it's not a GSBA program. And so that's what, I mean, that would have been more.
It's not approved by the Georgia Department of Education as a training provider.
And is there any hope that we could go to GSBA and say, credit those hours? I mean, they're valuable hours and they were more than enough for the whole board.
I don't think so.
This is okay. Because the result is that I'm going to be spending 6 hours doing completely meaningless online. So this is not a comment on Decatur's virtual learning, but I'm telling you that these online continuing education things are not time well.
And that's my point, is that I think let's try to avoid that as much as possible, because we have enough stuff that we need to be working on together, and that can be part of the training. And so we can work on things like the board handbook, the board norms, like all of those things fit right into the training. You're not limited to how much you can do together. You have a minimum. There's not a maximum of how much you can do together.
Typically it's either been conferences or a retreat, and because that retreat time was really the Colorado conference, I guess we didn't get either.
Correct. And so basically what we could do, for instance, we could engage with Zenda for like 2-3 hour sessions, for instance. And I think if not everybody, that would catch up most people, just that. And then maybe if there's somebody who needs more hours, you might just have to take one thing online as opposed to 2 or 3. Does that make sense?
I think that, yes, I think that makes sense. And one of those 3 hour sessions we have to have this month, but that won't count towards next year, I guess. And so.
Correct. At least one of them. I need to double check on the hours. I don't know if Shayna is here, if she can fill us in, but I will double check on the hours to make sure that we get them all in by September 30th.
And we've already scheduled, I think that the one for this September we scheduled, I think it's September 23rd.
I think so.
Right. And so we need to schedule 2 more upcoming.
Yep.
We need to schedule 2 more or 1 more, so it would be a total of 6 hours, right?
For those of us who need for this current year, that'll count toward.
There's Shayna. Hey Shayna, you want to fill us in on what you learned with all this, with the who needs what? Do you happen to know that or have a feel for it?
No public shaming here, come on.
We need whole board training, so everyone needs that. Louis and Tasha needs training, at least 6 hours or something like that, 3 apiece, 3 hours apiece. And then once everyone else gets the whole board training, I think everyone will be set for 1920.
Okay.
So, and I've sent links to the board, to the training catalog. But if you want, we can work something out with Zinda and have her come in and you all can do that together. Get that training done together. But we are scheduled for September 23rd for whole board training.
So if it's okay with all of you, we will do our best to put together a plan that gets all of the hours with as little like outside effort as possible, so that it's actually something valuable that we're doing, you know, the work that we're doing together. There may be some where you may have to do a couple hours outside, but we'll work on that tomorrow, Shana and I, and we'll let you know if what we're able to come up with to try to fill those hours. So
that's great.
Thanks for that. All right? I just want to make a comment that, you know, it might look different this year because the GSBA conference isn't going to be in person, but I ran into Julie Rame this week out walking our dogs, and I asked her what the plan was, and she said that soon they will be announcing what their plan will be, and likely there will be some virtual options. I thought that the first day, the first pre-conference day, was really valuable last year, and Jana and I both attended an equity training, and it counted toward individual hours, and it was very good. And there was a lot of networking going on at that meeting. So I think we should watch for that for the coming year to see what of those individual training sessions that would normally be associated with that pre-conference training come out of GSBA for the individual hours, because I thought that it was really good and it was really interactive. And they even did another session in July, and they were able to make it interactive using Zoom and breaking people up into groups. And so I thought that it was good. So I think we should consider that, while at the same time we still need to do whole board training. And I think, you know, that's what we're talking about doing now in September. I still like the way we collaborate on that, and I think that's been done really well in the past. So I'd like to continue doing that the way we have, working on things that we would know we need to work on anyway for the whole board training hours.
And I totally agree about the pre-conference workshops. They have been super valuable. I think that's what where Tasha and I met Glenn Singleton, was one of those pre-conference workshops, for instance, you know, so yeah, they've been some pretty awesome ones. Totally agree. All right, so we will work on that and communicate back to you what that all looks like when we put the pieces together. But I noticed Shana turned off her camera right away, but a huge thanks goes to Shana. She figured all this stuff out.
Yeah, thank you.
And had to like start from scratch and was calling Department of Ed and GSBA and just really dug into it. So kudos to her. I know she's there. You don't have to turn your camera on, Shana. It's okay. But
thank you for doing that. But really, also thank you for noticing that we were short, and because that was not on my radar at all.
Yeah,
so.
mine either. Yeah. So thank you very much.
All the kudos go to Shana. She saved us. Did a great job.
Thank you.
A lot of things have gotten
well,
no. Go ahead.
The last thing on the list is the board newsletter. So I've been jotting down a couple ideas for what our September issue of the board newsletter could look like. Just a reminder, if you did not see the August one, it is linked there in the agenda, so check it out. But one thing I thought we could do, we could talk about basic COVID update of like some budget implications. How are we tackling digital divide and safety prevention or precautions, things like that, that I think those folks may be interested in. We probably should let them know about the superintendent contract approved tonight, so they know that that's been extended. And then the homestead exemption work, of course, is very important for us to update them on. And so those were 3 topics that came up that we might want to talk about. Do any of you have any other ideas that we might want to put in a September issue?
I think that's going to be a nice chunk of, you know, what's going on right now. And yeah, I don't think, I mean, I like that we're very targeted with what we're doing with the, with that particular newsletter, and it doesn't necessarily have to be filled with a bunch of things, but just very targeted with what is important, especially for those who we're sending it to. We want them to read it. So I think those 3 things that you touched on are perfect for the next one.
Awesome.
I think we should add about bullet about the continuing education plan.
All right. Yes, they would love to know about that. All right. So I will we'll put together a draft again like we did last time. We'll share a Google Doc first, and then once that's all finalized, we'll put it into the fancy format and get that sent out whenever it's available. So be watching for that.
Great. Thank you.
Do we have future dates today?
Yeah, let me pull it up here. So board meetings, October 13, November 10, December 8th. And then just a reminder for folks that we had promised to announce a decision by September 18th. So we're working hard to get to that point.
Great.
Well, if there's nothing further, I think we're ready to adjourn. Okay, so this meeting is adjourned.
so.
Thank you all. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.